Hey everybody, this is Uncle Grumpy. Welcome to Grumpy Tonight here at Max's Garage in downtown Muskogee. Tonight we've been joined by Ron Durbin. Ron, I want to thank you for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me.
You have been instrumental in fighting the towns in the overregulation that they've been reaching for, this ridiculous draconian style laws they've been going for. I was hoping you would come on tonight and possibly break down some of what they've been trying to do and where you see how that doesn't fit into 788.
Sure. I'm first of all happy to be here. Thanks, Grumpy, for having me. Happy to share any information I can with people so that they understand kind of what battles we're fighting. One of the things that I really want to get out there is that there was a huge battle to get 788 passed on June 26th, but the battle continues every single day. And so one of the things that's important for people to remember is that they still have to show up at their local government meetings to make sure that these cities aren't passing regulations that are over-restricting the industry.
Now, I know you've been a leader in doing that. About how many cities so far do you think you've been involved in?
Grumpy, I think I've lost count at this point, more than 20 at least, probably more than 40.
So what do you think is so far the most outlandish, the most ridiculous thing they've tried so far as regulations?
Well, I think honestly the one I saw today from Wowoka is probably the one that to me screams the most as to what's causing this, and it's this this irrational fear that makes no sense to you and I or most normal people. And what it is they're comparing medical cannabis to alcohol. And so, like for the city of Wowoka, their ordinance, when they copied and pasted from various other ordinances, they did a poor job. And actually, part of their thing related to dispensaries talks about package stores. They didn't even bother to change the language. And what that does is it reassures me that we're correct and that they're treating this like it's alcohol and not medical cannabis and a product that can help people with their medical needs.
So is this just their attempt to keep it out of their town?
Yeah, I mean, what we see a lot of cities doing, for some reason, cities have this misconception that they can't touch dispensaries or they can't touch them as much. And so what I see in a lot of cities is I see them really restricting dispensaries and then outright banning growing and processing in their cities. And so, yeah, I think it comes from that.
Okay. Well, let's take this back to the beginning. After we passed 788, I don't even remember which town it was that started this, but I remember the first meeting I ran into you in was the meeting in Broken Arrow. And I don't even remember. Can you remind me what that exactly was about at that time? There's been so many.
Yeah, Broken Arrow, which I happen to live in the city of Broken Arrow, was meeting about some ordinances related to medical marijuana. They were trying to put some zoning overlays on medical marijuana dispensaries that tied into their alcohol overlays. So they were trying to seriously restrict where dispensaries could go, and they weren't treating them like pharmacies. And so, you and I were both at that meeting, and we all spoke, and we warned them and I warned them very clearly that, hey, look, we've been looking for a test case. You're in this is my city. I'm going to make you a test case. They ignored me, so we filed that Cloudy Mornings LLC versus the City of Broken Arrow case in Tulsa County. The Judge Pickrell, granted us an emergency injunction, which turned into a final injunction. Which the City of Broken Arrow has appealed to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. That case is actually sitting before the Oklahoma Supreme Court waiting for a final record on appeal to go up so that way they can hear arguments if they want to and make a decision.
Do you see obviously that's going to be a key case in the state of Oklahoma. It will be the first one addressing this issue to make it to our Supreme Court. Do you see a time frame as to when that could come through?
Unfortunately, when you're dealing with the Oklahoma Supreme Court or any appellate court, they kind of work on their own time frame. My hope is once I see the record on appeal certified by the Tulsa County Court Clerk, what we're going to do is we're going to ask for an expedited review. And essentially what that is we're going to say, okay, court, you've got the record you need, you've got all the pleadings and documents you need certified. Hear this case quicker because we need some kind of finality to this issue. One of the things that is frustrating is going from city to city over and over and over again, doing the same battle with this, with a different board, with a different city attorney over the same issues. And it would be nice if we can get a final decision.
Well, now, yeah, it would be, but isn't this something that 788 brings upon itself with the lack of details and specifics in some areas, like this area?
You know, 788 is certainly lacking in detail with regards to a lot of issues. I'll agree with you there. But on these particular issues, as lawyers, we rely on what's called the common law or the case law to sort of guide us in what the law is. And in this instance, I don't think 788 needed to speak about those issues. 788 spoke by not speaking. It did not expressly grant cities the authority to require these ridiculous permit fees and require these inspections and require these them to be in certain areas, you know, and adding all these additional restrictions related to parks and playgrounds. So I think 788, by not giving cities authority, speaks volumes.
But now, what I'm seeing that they're doing is every single one of those places where 788 doesn't directly speak, they're saying, well, it doesn't speak to that, so we can. So what do you say to that? I mean, because that's what I'm hearing from the cities, the councilmen.
Sure, they're getting bad legal advice. That's what I'd say to that. That they have incompetent city attorneys that have not researched this issue. And that's one of the things, and when I say incompetent, or ignorant might be a better word, because they've just not looked at this issue. And when we've dealt with cities that are receptive to anything to do with marijuana, and they look at the case law and the things that we provide to them, what we're seeing is they realize that, yes, they've overstepped their bounds, and they're going back and they're repealing these things. So a lot of this is just, and it's fortunate, a lot of this we can solve through education. And then we deal with some cities that just dig their heels in the ground. They're going to spend as much money as the city has to defend a lawsuit that they're ultimately going to probably lose.
Yeah, I'm noticing that some of these cities seem to be entrenched, and they would just as soon burn the house down as let this cannabis industry exist.
Absolutely.
So, I know there was a lot of press come out of, was it Grove recently that you were involved with? I know also, as I like to call him, our fearless floor leader, John Eccles, spoke at that meeting.
He did. Yeah.
Can you fill us in on what happened there and what that was all about to begin with?
Yeah, so the city of Grove passed a bunch of ordinances that restricted where dispensaries could locate. I had a client, and one of the things I want to point out is I do the work on sort of fighting the cities pro bono, so the client didn't get a bill for this. But they passed these ordinances. My client wasn't going to be able to open. And I looked through the ordinances, and they were the same over-restrictive thing that we had with Broken Arrow. So I spoke with the city attorney at length about the issues. I thought we had a deal that they were going to go back and repeal their ordinances and put in some ordinances that actually complied with 788. They reneged at the last second on their deal, and so we stopped playing nice and started playing the way that we needed to get the results we ultimately got.
So that didn't even have to go to court, did it?
No. Once I threatened to sue the counselors in their individual capacities and fight them trying to get their legal bills paid for by the city, for whatever reason they decided that discretion was the better part of valor there, and they backed down. So.
Can you tell me anything about the case that's going on out in Weatherford? I've heard a lot about that case.
Yeah, so we filed for an injunction in the city of Weatherford. The judge was on his way out. It was, in fact, we'd heard that he wasn't going to hear our case, and we show up that morning and he's there. Hadn't been there in 2 months, but he showed up for our case. He denied our injunction, and the thing about the Weatherford law is actually what the Weatherford law provides is that all businesses must comply with all local, state, county, and federal law in order to operate. And what we thought our point was very easy in that case. You can't possibly comply with federal law because it's still federally illegal. And for whatever reason, we can get into the politics of it, that judge didn't agree with us. So the injunction was not granted, but that doesn't mean our case is dead. We're still moving forward with the case. And ultimately, I think what's going to happen is the Broken Arrow decision is going to solve our problems there. And get us the result we need. It's the same case, essentially. And fortunately, what's funny is that one of the clients who was trying to open in Weatherford on Main Street, he's now right across the street from the county courthouse that made that decision.
Yeah.
And he's opened his dispensary there. So,
yeah, I did a patient drive there just
about
a
I
week
saw
or
that.
so ago.
That's Custer County, and he's right across the street from the Custer County courthouse. And what's funny is they welcomed him with open arms, and they've had no issues. Yeah. So it just goes to show that the fears are irrational, and they're based on a lack of understanding. That's why ignorance is probably the better way to describe some of these fears.
I think this is what we're running into right here.
Yep.
It's just reefer madness, and unfortunately, here in Oklahoma, I think it stems from that same era, from the same, these people were raised by people who watched that, or they watched that themselves.
Well, I think that first meeting that we went to with Broken Arrow, where they spent, on another proposal, they spent probably an hour and a half talking about how late people were going to dance. I think that footloose mentality, as I like to call it, I think that speaks volumes for where some of this is coming from.
Yeah, you would see a movie like that nowadays, and I, anyway, would think that's insane, that any town would be like that. But then you get involved in things like this, and you see that people really think that way. People really are that closed-minded on these kinds of issues.
Well, they are, and unfortunately, it is small-town Oklahoma where people can't afford to fight it. So, it's expensive to fight a governmental authority. And so, we've got cities like Wowoka, we've got cities like Ada, we've got Wagner County that passed all these weird zoning ordinances to ban growing from agricultural land. It's one of those things that's expensive to fight, and so a lot of times they pass these ordinances and nobody ever challenges them. And so they're in this instance, they're first getting the taste of what it feels like when there's somebody challenging them.
So what city are you taking on right now?
So we just resolved Collinsville.
Tell us what happened in Collinsville. Let everybody know first.
All right, so Collinsville, a dispensary that I did not represent up until this point, the World of Weed, they received a cease and desist letter from the city of Collinsville instructing them not to open their business. And it didn't explain why. Normally when a city, for code purposes, tells you don't do something, they say these are the codes.
Yeah, you would think they would have to give you justification for shutting your business down or preventing you from opening in the first place.
Right. And my clients had been over there multiple times. They'd applied for every permit they thought they needed. They were told that, hey, the city of Collinsville hasn't even passed any marijuana ordinances. Come to find out, the city of Collinsville had passed marijuana ordinances. Apparently, maybe they hadn't been typed up yet. And there wasn't.
So they passed them, but they weren't typed up yet?
They weren't.
I hate to stop you there, but I need that explained a little bit.
Well, we actually talked to a city. I don't remember if it was Collinsville or if it was another city. Maybe it was Wowoka, actually, that we talked to. And they passed ordinances, but they had to make some changes and do a final draft of them before they could give us a copy of them. That's happened a lot.
Is that the way of saying, well, we're not done figuring out how, but you can't do anything?
Right. Kind of. It's weird. I'll give you that. But it's oral amendments made during the hearing when, then the clerk who's supposed to do that doesn't do it for a couple of weeks, so it just sits on the back burner, and they never actually codify the ordinances and sign them.
So what ended up happening in Collinsville?
So in Collinsville, I reached out to their city attorney and explained to him the issues, and he knew who I was and what I was there trying to accomplish. And miraculously, they had an application form for their dispensary permit done the next day. I received that by email. We don't agree with their permit fees. We don't agree with their permit application fees. But I went ahead and had the clients go fill that out, submit it to the city. Miraculously, they managed to process this application in less than 4 hours. And that included an inspection from the fire marshal.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's some quick service.
That was some quick service.
Can I ask how much that quick service cost? The permit fees?
Yeah, for Collinsville, it was $100. And again, the law is very poorly drafted. It says permit / application fee is $100. Then down further, it says the permit fee is $1,000. So the way they interpreted it was, it's a $100 application fee and a $1,000 permit fee. Now, we're not done with that. I don't think the cities can charge any permit fee. So we're going to deal with that as we move forward. But in this particular instance, my clients felt, and I agree, getting open is the primary focus for them, getting the patients served in Collinsville. So that's what they've done. We're going to be dealing with the permit fees moving forward.
So will they be open soon?
They're actually opened. What's funny is as soon as they got inspected and he signed off on it, which was last night, they went ahead and opened for a little bit and served a couple of patients. And they've been open all day today and no problems whatsoever.
Good. Okay, well, I've got a whole bunch more stuff I want to talk to you about, but we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a few minutes with Ron. I started talking, saw it flash, so it threw me off. And we're back with Ron Durbin. Ron, this time I want to talk to you about more personal issues, not necessarily what affects business, but what's affecting the people out there. As far as your particular current expertise, which is the city ordinances, what do you think about what they're doing? Is like, I know there's a lot of cities that are doing required registration for a home grow, some even with a fee.
Right.
What are you hearing in that area, and what do you think about that?
A lot of cities have passed ordinances that require patients to register. I think that is an overreach of their authority. I don't think you should be required to register your medical conditions with a governmental entity at all. But in this particular instance, 788 is the only mechanism we have to get a license to be able to engage in patients utilizing the product. So we'll live with the state. But when these cities try to do it, there's no rational basis for them needing patients to register. They don't require patients to register their opiates, their antibiotics, or any of their other medication in order to possess or use those in their home. The same logic applies here for me, and I think cities overstep their authority when they try to require that.
But I'm noticing that that's the one that's not being challenged.
I disagree that we're not challenging that. We challenge that. Any city we go up against, we challenge patient registration. And you'll see in any of those cities that we've gone up against that
are they pulling? Are
yeah,
they,
absolutely.
They're getting rid of
absolutely.
patient registration?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I know Coweta was, in my mind, the worst offender that I dealt with, and they were the ones that were going to require you to pay the postage to first-class mail every property within 300 feet of your property that you were going to be growing, the same way they do with a sex offender.
Yeah.
And after we threatened them with the lawsuit that night, they backed off of that over the next 48 hours, but only that part of it.
Right.
They still have the home grow registration process. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever followed that, and I certainly encourage them all not to.
Well, what I would say is that in order for a governmental entity to enter into your property, they need a warrant. And in order for them to get a warrant, they have to have probable cause to believe that you are committing a crime. And the way I look at this is, under the state law, you have the right to possess, as a patient, certain amounts of medical marijuana, certain amounts of seedlings, certain amounts of plants. And, you know, if it were me, I would challenge their authority to require a patient registration. Everybody is different on what they want to do, and certainly I don't want to advise anybody to break the law. But what I would say is, if it were me, I'd be one challenging it and saying, if they showed up at my doorstep, I'd say, where's your warrant? And we deal with it that way. And we've dealt with that. I had a client that got arrested for having marijuana in his home. He called the pizza delivery guy.
I heard about that one. That was pretty out there.
It was out there, but he called for a pizza delivery. And the pizza delivery driver reported him to the police for seeing medical cannabis on his coffee table. The police show up. My clients present their medical ID card. They are then subsequently escorted out of the house and made to wait while a warrant was obtained. How that judge issued that warrant is boggling my mind to this day. And they were ultimately arrested for possession of marijuana. Fortunately, we were able to get the district attorney to not prosecute and dismiss the charges. So ultimately, the clients got out of it.
Okay, and this is what bothers me the most about situations like this. Yes, you got them to not continue to prosecute, but they started affecting that person's life the minute they showed up at the door, and started, in my opinion, violating their personal rights. What repercussions does that person have against a city that does something like that? Or is there any?
There's potentially some kind of state constitutional lawsuit related to that issue. Fortunately, Oklahoma's Constitution mirrors in many ways the U.S. Constitution with regards to personal rights. But normally when a police officer or governmental entity oversteps their authority, we bring an action on what's called 42 U.S.C. 1983. It's called 1983 action for short. And it's a federal civil rights case. Unfortunately, in this particular instance, we can't do that because it's federally illegal. So we don't have that protection of going to the federal courts for that issue.
So what do we do?
We fight them as they come up, and we educate as best we can as we go forward. And I think the word getting out there is helping. I wish I'd say it was perfect. I got somebody in Panama, Oklahoma 2 days ago. So a patient who had a patient card was pulled over for driving without a license and was issued a citation for possession of paraphernalia for having a grinder on him. He's got a medical card. He's got the right to have cannabis.
But they can still write.
I don't agree.
Because Okay, I've had this conversation with tons of people, including a few lawmakers and a business owner here in town who's extremely agitated by this one particular law. There's just no enforcement. They can, there's just no enforcement. 788 does not override or supersede existing laws.
I disagree.
It creates immediate conflict that has to be addressed by the new legislator.
I disagree. I mean, it would be nice for the legislature to deal with that because it has become an issue. But I think that it's what we call in the law repealed by implication. The fact that somebody has the right to possess marijuana, whether it's in flower or in some kind of extract form, they're going to utilize that marijuana product in some manner, whether it's a dropper from a bottle, or it's going to be smoking the flower, or it's going to be whatever it is. They have the right to take their medication. Therefore, the paraphernalia laws related to people who are utilizing those things to inhale or ingest their medication, it is no longer paraphernalia. It's repealed by implication. So I think we could win that in court without a shadow of a doubt. Fortunately, we haven't had to go that far.
And again, yes, you win that in court, but how many lives are destroyed on the way there?
I agree. Look, it's
how much money is spent by citizens to get themselves out of jail for things they shouldn't have been arrested for?
I wish there were more attorneys across the state that were doing things to try to help further this law. It's just not happening. I don't know where those attorneys are and why they're not kind of crusading with me. But the Domino's pizza delivery driver guy, I did that for free. I didn't charge him anything to do that because it's just wrong. I'm not going to charge the guys in Panama. The guy in Panama who got arrested for the grinder. I'm not going to charge him anything. And if I've got to drive to Panama, Oklahoma, to prove to them that he's got the right to take his medication with his license, then so be it. We're going to do it.
So when he gets out, does he get his grinder back?
So he only got cited.
So he was allowed to leave. So you just had to fight a fine.
Correct. We're fighting the fine.
And how much was that fine?
I don't know yet, actually. This just came to me 2 days ago, and we're still trying to figure out what the exact status is. It's probably going to be the same as what a normal paraphernalia charge was prior to 788.
Which was what?
In Oklahoma, the actual fines never really amount to much. It's the court costs which get you. So, for example, you get a speeding ticket for like 10 over. It's probably a $10 or $20 fine and $250 in court costs. So the fine is probably relatively small. It's the court cost that they tack onto you that really get you. I got a speeding ticket once that was a $10 fine and $170 in court costs. I fought that and won, though. So
I got a speeding ticket recently. It was just a big fat fine, and we'll just leave it at that.
Gotcha.
I was speeding, so
I didn't think I was. And my first trial was that speeding ticket, actually.
So, we talk about a couple people who have been arrested with medical cards, and I've heard from a few people who have been arrested without medical cards. Do you see the overall arrest of individuals in cannabis issues going down in Oklahoma? As far as, I'm not talking about the large quantity or the person who is muling it in. I'm talking about the user, the now patient.
I think we're going to have to wait to see the statistics that have come out. After they're analyzed by the various groups that look at court filings and what kind of criminal cases are filed. I'm seeing, in speaking with criminal attorneys across various counties, I'm seeing a decline in their business, and they're trying to figure out ways to supplement their business. So I think we're seeing a decline. Unfortunately, we passed not marijuana reforms, we passed criminal reform several years ago. In Tulsa County, for example, their charges and jail time for those same offenses that we reduced the punishments for went up, because they changed the way they charged them. So, for example, instead of charging you with simple possession, they now charge you with possession with intent to distribute, which is a felony.
Right.
And so it's county specific. But I do think that the numbers generally for simple possession are going down.
So as far as the individual, one of the things I get asked is when they're carrying their cannabis, you're allowed to carry 3 ounces on you at a time. One person I dealt with thought that had to be specifically labeled a certain way. Can you address that? Is there any specific laws that address the individual carrying any and how they should be carrying that?
No, there are no laws that deal with requiring them to carry it in any kind of packaging that's labeled.
And
in any manner.
nothing in these health department rules
No.
that come out addresses that. Because I was going over some of those just last night and reading about the transportation license and how that has to be in a sealed box.
But that's for transportation by a business.
But marked as
Right.
medical cannabis, but out of sight. And I'm wondering, is there any of that?
No, that transport law that you're talking about, or those regulations, I should say, those relate to, say, a dispensary transporting or a grow or a processor transporting. There are no laws or regulations related to a patient transporting their medication. What I would say is just make sure you have your medical card on you.
Right.
That's the key. And have I heard of stories of people being told by police that they need to have it in a labeled package? Yes, but is that true? No. And so what I always advise people is, when in doubt, there's an old saying in the law: you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride.
Yeah.
If the cops want to take you to jail, they're going to take you to jail. Exercise your right to remain silent. That's what you need to do. There's no reason to engage in a conversation or a debate with an officer.
Yeah, look, we've wrestled this one before.
We have.
Unfortunately, the last time we wrestled it wasn't on camera, so let's wrestle it again right
Sure,
now.
sure.
In fact, last time was in Bartlesville at that
Right.
that little conference thing we had there. That was a lot of fun.
It was.
Now, as somebody who's been in that situation, I find that in a lot of situations, if I was to shut down on an officer, I am going to invite more scrutiny.
Sure.
That will start with me being held in handcuffs because they no longer feel safe, and because of my attitude, and this is how they'll address it. And then I'll wait in their back of their car while they bring a dog to then circle my car, and if the
Right.
dog wags his tail to the left instead of the right, they'll determine that they can pull my seats out and
Right.
look and see if they could find a seat in my car.
Right.
But if I'm nice to the officer, I can sometimes go home.
In this particular instance, what I would say is, if an officer approaches you on a traffic stop, and that's normally where most people encounter police, it's on a traffic stop, and they indicate that they smell the odor of marijuana in the vehicle. First of all, I always advise don't smoke in your vehicle. But if they smell it, then that right there is probably probable cause to search your vehicle. So at that point, present your medical ID card and say, I've got a medical license and I'm only carrying what I'm supposed to. And when they, then you've got to kind of make a judgment call on how much you interact with them. If you're dealing with an officer who's obviously aggressive, and you know when you're dealing with one of those,
Yeah.
then it's probably best to just back off and not talk, because again,
Right.
you're probably going to go to jail if they really want you to go to jail anyway. People get arrested on false charges all the time. But if they're
Can't beat the ride, as you said.
But if they're being friendly and they're inquiring, and you just need to keep saying, I have a medical card, I only have what I'm allowed to have. And if they say, can I search your vehicle? My answer is no, you can't search your vehicle. If they want to search your vehicle at that point, I'm going to make them go get a warrant, or I'm going to make them do something and search it without my permission. Even if I know I'm in the right, I'm going to make them do that, because I don't like my constitutional rights being trampled on. So it's a judgment call on how you interact. But it's very rare, Grumpy, that I hear of somebody talking themselves out of charges. It's very rare. Being polite is fantastic. You should be polite. But talking more than you should,
I'm not saying talking more than you should, but this idea that, you should just roll your window down far enough to pass your card out and not speak to the officer and say, as few words as possible, can really set an officer off, especially some of these officers we have in Oklahoma. I mean, I've dealt with some of these. I've been, again, the receiving end. I was in this exact situation just a couple months ago.
Right.
On the way between Oklahoma City and back here, I was pulled over late at night. My car had the odor, and he asked me if I had anything in the car. I told him I had a vape in the console. He asked what that was. I explained to him what that was. He asked if I had anything else in the car. I said no. He asked if I had anything in the trunk. I said yes. He asked what. I told him. He asked for my medical card. He looked at it. He looked at my license. He handed them both back to me and said, have a nice day, and sent me on my way. And I was on a road. There wasn't even enough of a shoulder to pull off on. It was one officer and just me, and not a single street light anywhere. As somebody who's grown up in Oklahoma, that's a scary situation to be in. That's a very scary situation to be in.
I grew up in South Mississippi, so believe me, I understand.
And I feel like that officer was I could tell he was bothered by my card.
Right.
But it was because it frustrated him, and he didn't know how to deal with it. And
Right.
it was not long after; it was just a couple of weeks after I got my card.
Right.
So, and which was, I got mine within the first month, so it was still fairly new. And I could tell he was frustrated as he handed it to me and turned and said, "Have a nice day," or night, or whatever he said. And
it's one of those things that being polite doesn't go out the window just because you don't have to interact with the police if you don't want to. Being polite, especially if you're well within your rights and you have less than what you're legally allowed to possess, you've got nothing to worry about. Be as polite as you can be.
He did ask me, "Do you have any illegal drugs in the car?" And I looked at him over my glasses and said, "I have no illegal drugs in my car."
And that's the right answer.
And that was what I said. And that's when the conversation got a little more in detail.
Unfortunately, we can talk about Terry stops and we can talk about all these legal.
What is a Terry stop?
A Terry stop is an officer has to have a reasonable suspicion that you've committed a crime, you're about to commit a crime, or you've just committed a crime, in order to have probable cause to stop you and question you. Only upon a Terry stop do you even have the requirement, and there's some debate about this, to even identify yourself. But there's Terry, there's some Texas cases, there's a bunch of other cases out there that deal with all these little legal minutia about your rights and when you have to interact with the police, when you don't, what they can ask you, what they can't. They ask you, when can you, when do you have to identify yourself? Don't you have to identify yourself? What I'd say is don't get involved in the legal minutia. Identify yourself, present your medical card, and let them do what they're going to do. Because again, if they really want to take you to jail, they're going to take you to jail. And what I don't want to have happen is what's happened to some people when they are legally correct in their resistance to an officer. They still end up on the ground tasered, with pepper spray in their face, handcuffed in the back of a car. Yeah, we might beat the case, and we might, bring an action against them, but
now your eyes burn.
Right. I would just prefer you avoid the whole situation. So manners go a long way, and you just have to use some. I'm a lawyer, and if I get pulled over by the police, which is very, very, very rare, I'm always polite to them, even if I don't agree with them.
So perhaps you do Uber, so I could just have Ron in the car when I'm going around when I get pulled over.
Yeah,
I bet that's not the normal fee, though, is it?
What's funny is there's a video actually where an Uber driver gets pulled over. His passenger had marijuana or some drugs on him, and the officer gets sort of sideways with the Uber driver. And he said, "Where'd you get your law degree?" And the guy gives the answer where he got his law degree. Apparently, he was just like a first-year attorney, and he had a law degree. He's like, "Here's my bar card." That was pretty funny. There's a video. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's a good watch.
That's great. So, do you see any? Some of these legislators just like I do. Do you see anything as far as the personal laws? Do you see any restrictions being changed? Say, like the home grow. Do you see anybody doing anything towards other than the cities, which, as you say, we'll be able to fight that in the long run anyway?
No, and I mean in conversations with like Florida Eccles and Fedgetter and all the other ones that we've had conversations with multiple times, I don't foresee them trying to subvert the will of the people, so to speak. The final bills had to be filed today with the final language, so I will admit that I was waiting until tomorrow to read the final submitted bills to see what people are trying to propose as far as a final draft of a bill. So I don't know if there's anything sitting out there that's sort of going to address that issue. But rest assured that if there are problems related to protections for businesses or patients, I'm not going anywhere.
That's great. Okay, well, let's take another break, and I've got some more questions.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a minute with more with Ron. Okay, and we're back with Ron Durbin again. Ron, first I want to point out something I noticed recently on social media, that somehow you managed to hook you a very beautiful lady and you're getting married. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. So Brianna and I have been together for several years. She is an amazing woman.
She's a doctor now, isn't she?
She is a doctor.
So we have a doctor and a lawyer in the house.
We do. And, what's funny is one of the comments I get a lot is that I have some ulterior motive to why I do all this stuff and why I'm advocating for these things. And, she'd much prefer I was down in Alabama more with her, where she's a hospitalist, doing nothing. And so every time I come back to Oklahoma to fight these battles, she's not very happy about that. But we're very happy and excited.
So when is the wedding, or have you set a date
We've
yet?
not set a date yet.
Have you picked a state yet? You say she's down in Alabama. Have you picked a state?
Well, we've picked a territory. Does that count?
Sort of.
So
Not really.
the first trip we ever took together, we went to Puerto Rico, and we both fell in love with Puerto Rico. So we will probably have a very select group of friends and family that will arrange to get down to Puerto Rico for a intimate beach wedding.
Well, I hope you will share plenty of pictures with us.
We'll do.
So I want to talk to you about what happens next, where we go from here. Starting with the legislation, do you know of anything? I know we talked a little about it. We don't know what's coming out yet. All that stuff was supposed to be turned in, I think, today?
Correct.
So it'll be tomorrow before we can get our eyes on the language.
Right.
What do you see? Have you heard any bad things coming down?
I think what ultimately, Grumpy, we're going to have, and I'm very concerned about, to be quite honest with you, and one of the reasons I've sort of structured the business I've taken in a way that I have, I think we're going to ultimately end up with a situation where it's going to open the doors up for a lot of out-of-state money and competition. I'm very concerned about that.
Well, don't you see that's already? I mean, do you think that we could stop that at this point? I mean,
absolutely. I think we could stop that. We could fix. There's a massive loophole in 788 related to the 25/75 ownership, with 25% being owned out of state for the license holder. But what it doesn't provide is that any ancillary business that has interest doesn't have to necessarily be split that way. So I could let you have 75% of a business, but I could hold 100% of the note and take a royalty off the business, and I would never own any of your business, and I can siphon off all your money. So closing some of those loopholes that are in 788 would be helpful.
Before you even get to that loophole, don't we have first the one with the residency of just requiring a driver's license from Oklahoma?
Yeah, but at least that makes them do something. I agree that that's a very easy thing to get around, but we don't even have to go that far. Again, if I wanted to own 100% of a marijuana dispensary, and say you were from California and you wanted to fund that, all I'd have to do is give you 10% royalty off of all sales, and you're siphoning off all the profits without owning any of the business. So right now, 788 is so easy to get around with regards to residency requirements. It's like there's not a residency requirement.
Have you met any of these new legislators that we're going to be dealing with this year? Because there's I think 42 in the House, or 46. It's 40 something in the House, and around 20 in the Senate.
Yeah, I think those numbers are correct. And what I can say is that, Grumpy, my time has been so focused on all these fights across the state that, and my personality comes off a little more aggressive sometimes than is necessarily good for lobbying. So
maybe they should call you Grumpy.
Maybe they should. I try to stay away from lobbying because, again, I don't really have the knack for kissing up to people or continuing to deal with ignorance. I lose my patience very quickly.
You mentioned the word lobby. I want a lobbyist here in this case. I want to delve into that. Last week, the Ethics Committee, under the direction of a lady House member from Tulsa. I don't remember her name off the top of my head. It was a Democrat from Tulsa. They took up an issue. It doesn't even have an SB or an HB in front of it yet. It's just considered Amendment 2019-02, which it changes the definition of indirect lobbying.
Right.
And they read us that they gave us a PowerPoint of their definition of how this law plays out. And basically, they could have mapped out everything I've done over the last year, and everything was addressed in there, and everything would require me to then, not only for me to register as a lobbyist, but for then me to give the names and information of everybody who ever, in the past, when I was when donations were keeping me on the road,
right,
all those people, I'd have to give up their information as well to be, as they said, put on their website for immediate viewing. And immediate viewing was their word, not mine.
Right.
No double checking or anything of the information, just putting it out there immediately, cold, out there, everybody's information. What do you see? I mean, why would, and this is a lady, she's now starting her second term. Why would someone try, she says it's to regulate, to stop dark money, as she refers to it. But is that not mostly out-of-state money, and we can't regulate that anyway?
Well, yeah, a lot of the money is out-of-state money. No, I don't think it's to regulate those people. I think it's to regulate people who are activists like yourself, myself.
So you think this is a deliberate
Absolutely
point the finger at us, like that they don't want to go through what they went through with the teachers last year?
Right.
Because again, if they just, every teacher that suggested to their friends on Facebook how they should vote, who they should vote for, if they raised any money and that money totaled $500 within a year, they'd have to be a registered lobbyist. That would, as I said to the ethics committee, that would shut down the next movement if this passed.
Yeah, I think that has some serious free speech implications, which the Oklahoma Constitution actually provides some protections for. I think it would be a clear violation of that. We would challenge that. Technically, under their proposal, I would be required to register. And while you instructed me to watch my language on the show, I would have normally an expletive with an F in front of it stuck somewhere in there and a middle finger stuck up in the air.
Well, hey, look, if it makes you feel any better, when I addressed the committee, I did tell them that I would be the first person to line up to sign that paper to file that lawsuit. And it was with you as my attorney that I was thinking that.
Well, I'm there for you, buddy. I'm there for you.
Yeah,
you know,
you were included in that thought.
We will not stand for that at all. That is an absolutely absurd requirement. You know, people who are coming together for a common purpose to address or redress their government with their grievances. You know, the initiative, the referendum, and the reform, all those things that sort of was the populist platform in America long ago, is sort of thriving, at least in the state of Oklahoma right now. And if they want to stifle the ability of the people to come together and work as a common unit to advocate for their beliefs, then I'm going to tell you right now that irate. It makes me more irate than what some of these cities are doing. And it's the libertarian in me. But we'll be there for that. And, you know, Chris, if I could, one of the things that I'm concerned with regards to the cannabis movement is that we've sort of lost that unity and that drive to move as a group towards a common purpose. And so what I would encourage anybody that's watching this is to really think about the fact that while you're working on your business or your patient license or all those things that you're working on, one of the things that people should be looking at is coming together still as a common voice, because it's that common voice that results in change.
And while I agree with that, I think where the people are lost is in figuring out what to do with that voice right now. Now, we were united before because we had a purpose.
Sure.
Excuse me. That purpose was 788. We have 788.
Right.
Now people are concerned about their particular own issues.
Sure.
And not so much about the collective. And so do you think, I mean, let's throw it out there. Do you think that it's a matter of we need another petition before we can get everybody united again? We need to be talking about recreational or full access?
Well, you know, I wrote 796 and 797 that didn't get enough signatures, or at least I wrote 99% of them. No, I think what it is that there's not been a unifying force. Because there are issues all over the spectrum. Dispensaries have issues, growers have issues, processors have issues, patients have issues, people who are employed by certain employers have issues. There are all kinds of ancillary issues. And what I think is we've got all these we were talking about outside money. We've got all these groups that are coming in with high-paid lobbyists that they're hiring. I had a big group contact me through their in-house counsel, which means they already have an attorney that's employed by them full-time.
Yeah.
They have a serious amount of resource behind them, and the money can buy a lot of those things. Most Oklahomans and most of these small businesses and medium-sized businesses that I represent can't do that. The way that they do that is through a collective voice. And I think that, and I'm working on some things, Grumpy, but I think that there's a collective voice that's necessary that's, you used to always say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. It's one of those things that we've got to maintain that mentality. And we've got to have an organization that brings together these groups and continues to fight on a political spectrum, as opposed to figuring out how to profiteer.
That would be nice. So what's next for you? Where are you headed after this?
I'm headed to Houston tomorrow. It's my fiance's birthday, so we're gonna spend some time in Houston and then have a little fun. Then I'm heading to Alabama for a little bit of time. I'll be working a lot of time. I'm down there as I always do. But where I'm really headed, and I've got some big news, but that sort of unifying group, I'm working on putting it together. I'm working very diligently. I've hired some people to help me put it together. But our goal is going to be to provide that sort of resource to lobby. You know, the Oklahoma Restaurant Association is out there lobbying for restaurants and bars. You know, you've got the NRA out there lobbying for guns. You've got all these other groups. We need somebody that's out there watching all of our periphery and making sure that the people and the small and medium-sized businesses that are Oklahoma owned and operated are protected.
Well, I remember in all those meetings, when we all worked on the Unity Plan, that was something we spoke a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about.
You and I.
Well, and others to some degree, whether they were for it or against it,
Sure.
it was talked about.
Sure.
And that, it seems to me anyway, like most of that was forgotten after we passed 788. Like I said before, we don't have a unified voice anymore.
No, we don't have a unified voice, and I'm going to tell you that I've not forgotten. And if you haven't figured it out, I'm pretty active and vocal, and so I'm going to continue to be so. And you know, I've been approached by some, and I've told you this before, been approached by some very big groups to represent them and help lobby for their causes, and you know, I've turned down that opportunity because that's not why I'm doing this. I could be sitting in Alabama with a fiance that makes more than enough money, but this is something that's sort of become a passion project, happenstance or not. It's a passion project, so we're going to keep carrying it out, and I'm not going anywhere.
So you've got a few businesses around, don't you?
You know, a few.
I think you mentioned earlier that you had a country bar. I
Yeah.
thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my hand in sort of a lot of things.
I could just see you in a cowboy hat. I could see that up the top there.
You know, I bought my first pair of boots about 6 months ago. I think I've worn them twice.
Yeah.
You know, I've got my hands on a lot of things, and the way I look at it is sort of, it goes back to what we're doing with medical cannabis in the state of Oklahoma. I want to create businesses that provide an opportunity to employ people, provide people with jobs and security, and do those kind of things. And it's a fantastic ability to be able to give somebody a job. And that's what this industry has done for Oklahoma. And what I'm afraid we're going to end up with is a sort of modulated system where most of it's done from out of state, and we employ very few people in the state of Oklahoma in this industry. That's not what Oklahoma needs, and that's why I'm going to keep fighting for the small and medium-sized businesses. And obviously, anything I do, it's always patient first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm certainly glad that you're on our side. I
Appreciate it.
I much prefer the you be working with us as opposed to against us. I've seen you be the thorn in the side of many city councils.
Well, you know, it's the debater in me. It's one of the things I enjoy. Jury trials. We don't, as attorneys, we don't get very many of those. It's very hard to get to a jury trial. So this is my attorney ability to debate comes into play here, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So don't ever make any mistake. Yes, sometimes it's frustrating, but I'm having a blast out there fighting for people's rights. It's fun.
What are you doing on the 25th? The ethics board is looking at that issue again, because they told us at the beginning of that meeting that there were certain issues that were going to be moved to the next meeting, and I immediately blurted out and said which ones, for which they said, well, we don't know, we'll decide as we go along. And since we had people speaking against their amendment, it had to be moved to the next meeting.
I'll have to look.
We're hoping this time that, you know, we just flood the place. I mean, I got to tell you though, 99% of the people that were there, I think, were there only for this issue, and everybody but one was against it.
Yeah, I can't see that getting that much popular support.
Yeah.
I think that, as somebody has said before, sometimes there's smoke and mirror things that are put out there to sort of deflect your attention. I'm not sure if that's one of those things. I'm certainly, if I'm in town and I'm able to be there, I'll be there. But if not, you know, I'll write a letter and give you all the guidance you need. I've never refused.
I'll have plenty to say, I can assure you. I just may need you to file some paperwork to either get me out of jail or file a lawsuit. I'm not sure which.
Well, I'm sure we can handle both of those things. Grumpy.
Okay, Ron. Well, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Ron, I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hopefully, we can get you back. Say every couple months you come back and give everybody an update on what's going on with these towns.
More than happy to.
Okay. All right, folks. We're going to wrap it up from Max's Garage. That's it for tonight. Stay grumpy. I'll see you on the road. In the summer of 2018, despite a fierce and well-financed opposition, the state of Oklahoma passed State Question 788, giving the citizens the most open medical marijuana system in the U.S.
The people of Oklahoma spoke last night, and they said they wanted medical marijuana.
Critics tried to frame 788 as being too loosely written, pointing to the bill's lack of qualifying conditions. Proponents countered that the bill would allow maximum access to the widest range of patients. State Question 788 passed by more than 13 points. My friends call me Grumpy. I'm a citizen lobbyist on the front lines of the cannabis revolution in the great state of Oklahoma. I represent not only the 507,000 individuals that voted for medical cannabis, but my fellow citizens who need this medicine. Join us as we travel the state to meet with politicians, activists, business owners, but most importantly, patients.